Back to another episode of Stand on Guard. This is your host, David Krayton, and I'm broadcasting live from Ottawa. It's a pleasure to be here today. Hope you enjoy this interview with Marty Moore. He's with the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. You've had opportunities to listen to John Carpe, who's also with the JCCF. Marty has some really interesting comments to make about a lot of different issues, and I think you're going to like this. We'll be back in mere moments.
The Prime Minister lied and his minions continue to lie.
We need political change, but we also need to resolve to resist. Yes, please like the station, like the show, and subscribe if you haven't already. We're past 61,000, headed for a goal of 65 over the next week. I think we can do it if we keep doing the right things. Really enjoy talking to Marty, but we talked, of course, about the ban on hikes, which the premiers in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia have installed, but then are trying to justify in the most bizarre fashion. Is it going to come to Ontario? Well, Doug Ford, of course, was a lockdown king during the COVID pandemic. But here's Doug Ford having his latest breakdown.
So I appreciate the question. Sorry, I'm getting a little passionate today about this because that guy drives me crazy down south, I'll tell you, and 41 million other Canadians. So.
Well, Doug Ford drives me crazy. Here's a good thing. This is a private member's bill, care of Conservative MP from Calgary Nose Hill, Michelle Rempel Garner. I used to be in contact with Michelle quite a bit, and I haven't really spoken to her for quite a while, but I think this is a great initiative. And this is about equality under the law. And I think this could also be applied not just to non-citizens. I find this incredible. But let's bring the playing field down so we're all equal under the law. We don't have some groups are more equal than others. Some ethnicities, some races, some genders have special status. Let's bring it all down to everybody's equal in this country under the law. Here's Michelle.
I am announcing that Conservatives will introduce legislation to amend the Criminal Code and restore the value of Canadian citizenship by ending the practice of judges considering a non-citizen's immigration status in sentencing. Since 2013, a Supreme Court ruling has permitted judges to consider immigration status when sentencing. This has been seen in several recent high-profile cases. For example, a permanent resident received a conditional sentence after being convicted of trying to purchase sexual services from a 15-year-old, as a stronger penalty would have hindered him and his wife from obtaining Canadian citizenship. Another non-citizen in Canada on a visitor's permit was convicted twice of groping an 18-year-old woman's genitals at a bar, yet received a discharge to avoid a permanent criminal record and to allow for an appeal of their deportation. Anyone seeking residence or citizenship in Canada has responsibilities as well as rights. When it comes to sentencing non-citizens, Canada has essentially adopted a form of two-tier justice where judges can and have given lighter sentences to individuals who are non-citizens by virtue of this ruling. This offends all principles of fairness that should be foundational to our justice system. This is why, once the House of Commons resumes this fall, Conservatives will introduce legislation to amend the Criminal Code to rectify this issue. Our bill will add a section after Section 718.202 of the Criminal Code, which will expressly outline that any potential impact of a sentence on the immigration status of a convicted non-citizen offender or that of their family members should not be taken into consideration by a judge when issuing a sentence.
I like that. Very good. That's what Pierre Poilievre needs to stick to. Common sense legislation, fighting back on the insanity of liberal policies and practices. Now, without further ado, let's do our interview with Marty Moore. I hope you all enjoy. Back to another episode of Stand on Guard. I'm your host, David Krayton, and it's my real pleasure to have Marty Moore on the show. He's one of the lawyers with the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, and you know we've had John Carpay on in the past, and Marty is one of the team working for freedom as a lawyer, and it's nice to have you on the show, Marty. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, David. It's my privilege to be on the team.
Well, I wanted to talk about this issue here if we could start. And this is, I've been covering this for the last couple of days. I covered it yesterday morning. And I find this whole thing just absolutely astounding. And I think you referred to them, if I look at your X post here, politicians are copycats. I love that. To see one political leader getting away with something, they tend to follow. Politicians need to be held accountable for violating Canadians' freedoms to prevent copycats. Now, I've done a lot of work in the last couple of days on this file because I'm absolutely astounded. Once again, there's a red Tory premier, Tim Houston from Nova Scotia, at the forefront of this, as well as a Liberal from New Brunswick, Premier Sue Holt, who's into this. And of course, on the periphery, we have Premier John Hogan from Newfoundland, who so far his ban is just on setting fires in the woods. But that's how it started in Nova Scotia. It was just a ban on fire, and they escalated this. Let's see if I can find this here. You know, they've escalated it. Yeah, they escalated it from a ban on fires to now it's a ban on hiking in the woods. Mm-hmm. And I just found this almost emblematic of the way Canada's going. We're becoming like what's happening in Keir Starmer's Britain, where we're losing basic freedoms. In Britain, they've lost the basic freedom of speech to the Online Safety Act. In Canada, we've lost something. I think whether you grow up in Nova Scotia or British Columbia, where I did, a walk in the woods is something we almost consider a sacred constitutional right. And when governments step in and say, sorry, you can't even hike in the woods because you might set a fire, I'm very aghast at that. I mean, how do you even begin to describe this kind of authoritarian bureaucratic action?
Well, in my view, David, it's anti-human. The idea that citizens can't go for a walk in the woods when it is acknowledged by, for example, Premier Holt, that walking in the woods has no connection to a risk of fires. They acknowledge that, yet they still impose this ban on people walking in the woods. Why are they doing that? And I saw a tweet by Andrew Coyne, saying, well, there is no sacred right to walking in the woods, as if that needs to be expressly outlined in the charter. There's something called liberty, and your liberty interest is your freedom to go and move about without the government penning you in. But 50% of the land in New Brunswick, for example, is public land. You're not allowed to set foot on that land now. So now 50% of the land is off limits to you as a tax-paying citizen of New Brunswick. And in Nova Scotia, you can't even go to your neighbor's house and walk through their woods because the private land is also covered by the ban in Nova Scotia. And so, yes, the concept of liberty extends that far, but even broader. You expect your government to act reasonably. That is the basic baseline of this. And this ban on people walking in the woods doesn't even pass that deferential standard. Just be reasonable. And, good on Premier Hogan there in Newfoundland for not being a copycat, at least yet, and we hope he doesn't get there. It may have something to do with the different attitude of Newfoundlanders. I worked with Newfoundlanders in the oil field, and I tell you, if something was offside and it was too early in the morning for that, they would say so. And maybe that's a little bit of the pushback that Hogan's getting. Unfortunately for our friends in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, their premiers are treating them in an anti-human way. This is not something that promotes human flourishing. It has no connection to a fire risk, but rather it's treating people as the problem generally, not treating arsonists as the problem. Arson is the #1 cause of fires in Nova Scotia, but we're not talking about that. We're not talking about let's spot an arsonist, let's watch out for those people that have some sort of agenda to start these fires. No, we're talking about how everybody has to stay out of the woods. We all have to come together and not do activities. Where have we heard that before with a similar logical basis?
Well, that's a very good question. And of course, you look at this scene here. Really, a picture is worth 1,000 words. Here they've got this yellow taped off, barricaded, like it's a murder scene. And maybe it is a murder scene. It's the killing of our individual freedom in this country, just another nail in the coffin. I found this to be a fascinating picture because, of course, you'll see these all over the place. But you mentioned something which I think is quite interesting in terms of why are the governments, the provincial governments, and not the federal government, ever talking about arson? Because every time we have these wildfires, there's always concurrent arrests of arsonists. And if you look at the figures, the numbers, arson is by far the most notable cause of fires. And so is lightning. There's actually no distinction on the statistics that says climate change did this. But that, of course, is what we hear constantly. Every time we have wildfires, it's just so horrible, and it's going to get worse. And this is the new normal. We hear this from the mainstream media, preaching this message of climate change equals wildfires. Climate change equals wildfires. Just remember that. And no sacrifice is too great to stop this. And we have to always remember that. But it's interesting. I was looking at a slide this morning. The worst year ever for wildfires in Canada was not 2025, 2024, 2023, even though the media likes to say never been worse. 1989 was the worst year for wildfires, and it was virtually twice as bad as it's been in the last couple of years, where we're told this is an epidemic of wildfires. It's never been worse. We're living on hell, a planet from hell. So is there a political reason? Well, I mean, it's an obvious, a rhetorical question. Is there a political reason we don't hear governments talking much about arson, even though the police continue to arrest arson suspects every time we have wildfires?
Well, yeah, I mean, to your point, David, 2023 numbers for Nova Scotia, the #1 cause of fires in that, what was a bad fire year in Nova Scotia, 53 for arson. And not like, you don't even see a lightning strike on that list. Spontaneous combustion is what had apparently won. So we don't know exactly what that was, but campfires caused 13, but 53 from arson. That's giving you an indication of what the cause was. But do you know what they did to amend their Forest Fire Act in light of the 53 fires caused by arson? In 2024, Nova Scotia amended their Forest Act to address that, the leading cause of concern. And do you know what they did? They imposed a deep penalty for arson, didn't they, David? Oh, no, they didn't, David. They amended their Forest Act to say that the purpose of this act is to fight forest fires in a, quote, changing climate. So in light of their data, which was 53 fires set by arson in Nova Scotia, their response was climate change. And so if you can follow that logic, you're doing exactly what they want you to do. And of course, we can see the criminal justice system in this country, which is severely broken. We've been, and even tomorrow we have another Freedom Convoy trial going on again, because of course that's where we need to dedicate the prosecution resources of this country. But in Saskatchewan, a gentleman who started intentionally 30 fires, and he was a member of the volunteer fire department there in Saskatchewan, he was convicted, and guess what he got for a penalty, David? Was it the 8 years in jail they want to put Chris Barber away for? Or was it, no jail time, 100 or 200 hours of community service, and 18 months of probation? and it's all good. That is how we treat 30 intentionally set fires. And we're saying, and a CBC story yesterday had myself speaking on this issue, and the response was from a fire chief who said, well, desperate times call for desperate measures, David. Oh, desperate. What are you so desperate about? Are you desperate to stop forest fires? Or is there a desperation to justify a climate change power grab? And you mentioned the United Kingdom, David. They've lost other liberties as well. You know, you drive a car in the United Kingdom, you drive it in the wrong way, in the wrong spot, well, those cameras will catch you, and they'll make sure that you get that extra fee and fine in the mail. Well, if the logic of banning people in the woods applies, that's going to apply a lot more to you driving your car, David. That'll apply to, well, there's not enough first responders to help, David. We are in a time of emergency. You can't go in the forest because there's not enough first responders. Oh, well, we can't allow you to drive your car, David. There's not enough first responders to make sure that you can be safe if you happen to have a car accident. Oh, well, there's a risk if you drive your car. Well, guess what? There's a lot more risk from driving your car than walking through the forest. This is a safetyism culture leaning towards totalitarian control, and it's not justified, and it needs to be challenged, and that's what we're doing.
Well, thank God for that, because you guys are always front and center challenging the insanity of Canadian law and legislation right now. But as soon as I heard Premier Holt talk about, well, I know a lot of you people think this is silly, making a correlation between starting fires and hiking in the woods, but get this, the real reason is we won't have a first responder for you when you break your leg walking in the woods. My first thought was I have a better chance of breaking my leg walking through the Ottawa downtown market, because it's becoming so violent, than I do taking a hike on the Trans-Canada Trail here in town. I found it absolutely incredible, but it reminded me of something. I'm sure it reminded you of something. During COVID, we were constantly being lectured that if we didn't follow the lockdowns, we didn't follow the mandates, we didn't get our vax, then we deserved whatever came our way. And you want to go to the hospital? Sorry, hospitals aren't for people who don't follow the rules. And I thought the same. Do you see the correlation here between what's going on with this latest bit of insanity and what went on for 2 or 3 years under the COVID pandemic?
The correlation is certainly there. The lack of logic, the lack of any appeal to reason, David, but rather this appeal to fear. If you look at Tim Houston there in Nova Scotia, he's really animating that fear. He's got his suit jacket off. He is dialed in at pressing your fear buttons. And by the way, it's a $25,000 fine. And then we will get these fines out there. There's going to be a zero tolerance policy. That's not the way a country that respects the foundation of individual rights and liberties that our charter protects acts. We have this idea that we don't have to justify our actions to you. We just have to cause you to either fear a forest fire and some crazy risk of forest fire because it's never been this bad, and you can't dare walk in the woods, or you are not doing your part to keep your neighbors safe, or we'll fear the punishment and we'll make sure you get that punishment in full. Fear is not the way you govern in a free society, but that is exactly the use that they're doing right now in this, quite frankly, a climate change power grab. I don't see any way other to describe this. And it's also just bizarre to look at, the Canadian commentariat, the mainstream here, freaking out that there's people in Canada that actually understand that rights and liberties are there to be respected by government, and government shouldn't be interfering with people's personal decisions unless they have a good basis for doing so. It doesn't matter the color blue, red, orange, or pink. It doesn't matter. Whatever the team color is, the idea that you're violating the liberties and freedoms of Canadians should be a universal concern for Canadians. And there's a lot of people talking out there like, oh no, we are the problem by raising the concern. As if, I mean, this, our client, Jeff Evely, here's a veteran, 20 years, dedicated to defending Canadian freedoms, to serving his country, and they're acting as if he's the problem for respectfully getting a ticket. He challenged this similar type of lockdown in 2023 when he was prohibited from going to the forest, and the courts wouldn't hear it. They'll hear it now for sure, though. And we look forward to representing Mr. Evely in court, challenging these ridiculous and unreasonable restrictions in his province.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. You also brought up my good friend Chris Barber, who has gone through, of course, 3 years of lawfare and 3 years of hell. And when I listened to the Crown describe Chris Barber at his sentencing hearing, which went on for a couple of days, I thought, it's like they think he's a terrorist. This is how they're describing this man. A man who cooperated with police, was incredibly positive in his peaceful protesting, didn't destroy a single piece of public or private property, didn't break a window, didn't occupy a government building, didn't illegally enter anyone's premises, didn't start any fires. And yet he's being treated almost like a terrorist. And yet you talked about this accused firebug, and I think the same province, who is accused of setting 30 fires. And hey, maybe it's just a problem he has. And let's not be too hard on him, because after all, he's a firefighter who perhaps likes to be close to fires. Maybe that's the reason he's in the fire business. But I find this double standard to be not just unsettling, but so tragic. And it's almost like I see in this today. And we'll get to Sean Feucht in a second, because that was the other thing that told me this country is in such serious danger. I don't know if we can get out of it. But did you find that juxtaposition of Chris Barber potentially losing his truck? That I found fascinating, because as bad as 8 years for peaceful protesting is, for a provincial government to insist on taking somebody's livelihood, taking his truck away simply to be vindictive, there's no other reason for it, is to me almost the death knell of freedom in this country. I mean, were you shocked with that particular ruse, if you will, on the part of the Crown Council?
Yeah, not terribly shocked, but it does underlie or highlight maybe the broader issue here, which is our public conversation on these points. There's a narrative that was spun and as artfully woven as possible, with absolutely no relationship to the facts regarding the Freedom Convoy. And the media, if they weren't the cause of it, they were the absolute essential part of it. You don't have the media description of the Freedom Convoy as some lawless, hateful, bigoted, whatever, name your problem, put it on the Freedom Convoy and describe it to the general public sitting at home. That's what the media did about them. And so if that narrative is out there, then the prosecutor's unhinged rant against the Freedom Convoy somehow has some ring to it. You're there in Ottawa. Others like Rupa Subramanya, honest actors in the media, are able to say, you're not speaking the truth. And there's so many people in the media that went along with that. And then, yes, we get to an intentional arsonist in Saskatchewan. And you know what the media story says? Well, David, the reason why, we're only giving him 200 hours of community service and 18 months of probation, it was a mentally challenging time for him. We don't know what the mental challenge is. Well, how about the Freedom Convoy? These people lost their jobs, their livelihoods, and the federal government, after 3 years of relying on truckers, is now saying, oh yeah, we're gonna force you guys to get vaccinated or not continue to haul the life-giving materials you do across the border every day. And we wonder, how is that mental load on Canadians? Would we expect them to be protesting? I mean, we would turn a blind eye to all sorts of other causes doing violent protest and riot. But here's a group doing peaceful protests, and yes, we have to brand them as some sort of terrorists to the good citizens of Ottawa. You're right to pick up on that faulty narrative structure, but it is a media narrative. It is not in line with the facts, and that's a danger when our society does not act on the facts, but rather acts on the fear-based narratives that they're being fed by the media.
Well, yeah, I couldn't have put it better. And I was struck by the fact that the same week as the Freedom Convoy sentencing hearing was going on with Chris Barber and Tamara Leach, we also had a visit to Canada from somebody I wasn't even familiar with. I'm perhaps vaguely familiar with Sean Feucht, but I certainly wasn't that aware of his activities. I wasn't aware of his campaign entitled Let Us Worship, which is a church pushback to the conditioning evangelical Christians especially, and conservative Catholics received during the pandemic. They were told essentially by police, mayors, governments, authorities, don't go to church, and if you do, we'll arrest you. And pastors, don't minister to your flock or we'll arrest you and we'll put you in jail. And I think of Arthur Pawlowski, who was treated like a terrorist. He was put in a maximum security prison and treated like he was a dangerous felon. And this is what the churches have been conditioned to. So Sean Feucht comes to Canada, and it's like his worst nightmare about Canada comes true. He's denied access to public facilities, to a public forum in 6 Canadian cities. When he goes to churches, those churches are harassed. The police enter the churches, try to frighten people out. They bar the doors. In Montreal, a Spanish Catholic church has to pay $2,500 for hosting an evangelist / musician. And I don't know if I've ever heard another instance of this in Canada, where a church, and I'm an evangelical, I've gone to church most of my life. I'm not aware of any church, evangelical, mainline Protestant, or Catholic, that has to pay a fine when they invite somebody to come to their church to minister and to sing or play instruments. And the funny thing is, of course, Sean Feucht, if you watch the videos, not just of his previous concerts throughout the world, but the ones he did in Canada, there's no politics at all. It resembles what I've seen for most of my life going to church on Sunday morning. And I was absolutely furious at the treatment this man received. And this happened the same week as the Crown had the indecency to describe Chris Barber and Tamara Leach as hardened criminals who did outrageous things. And I thought, my God, we've lost not only our freedom of speech, our freedom of assembly, but now it looks like we're losing our freedom of religion in Canada. And I think you've got I think this is your post. Yeah, you said, Canadians are standing up and pushing back against government censorship. I am privileged to lead a team of lawyers across Canada funded by JCCF Canada. Our team is working with the organizers of the Sean Feucht events to hold the government entities who canceled these event bookings accountable. Court cases are coming. So I guess the two-pronged question is, were you outraged over how Sean Feucht was treated by mayors, cities, authorities, Parks Canada? The list goes on and on. And I think the Parks Canada really is the linchpin in all this. I think that's where some of these direction was coming from. And secondly, how do you plan to counteract this? And will this be started, or has this started, or will it be started in time for his return, Sean Feucht's return to Canada on August 20th, where he will be appearing somewhere in Winnipeg? He's not sure. The last time I talked to him, I interviewed him last week.
Well, this is certainly an incredible situation. The background context here is Sean Feucht's not been coming to Canada to do any sort of political rallies at all. It's rather a Canadian group of artists and musicians and worship leaders is so blessed by Sean Feucht's worship music, and they have organized a tour across the country to provide free family-friendly concerts that people can just walk to in their city. And they did this before without any incident. People loved it. I've talked to people I know in Calgary that went last time it came through, just loved it right in the downtown of Calgary. And then you went to Halifax and you had MPs and politicians going after Parks Canada to cancel that booking in Halifax. Not because the event would be dangerous, not because any of the songs are offensive. I mean, I realized I actually had one of these CDs given to me, like 10 years ago, just beautiful background worship music, nothing offensive at all. And yet these MPs are going after the federal government to cancel the booking, and the federal government cancels that booking based on safety concerns. Here's that word again, David. It's a safety concerns, because, oh yeah, we'll always take away your freedoms and liberties for some reason. And what's the easiest reason to turn to? Safety. And it's safety about what? You want to stand and sit and listen to a worship music going on in a park, or is it something entirely different that they're dealing with? And, across the country, I remember that night in Montreal, being on the phone when the Montreal police were trying to shut down and threaten this church from having a worship service. They had communion. They had people come up and pray in that service. And here the police are out there warning them that this is against the rules. And I mean, we had defense lawyers standing by in Montreal that night, ready to intervene should anything go further. Thankfully, the police stayed back. But then again, at the obvious direction of the mayor, fine that church. Just crazy. The Democracy Fund is taking that case. And this across the country, as we've continued to work with the organizers, you see a real tension. Do any governments in Canada respect Canadians' fundamental freedoms, which includes the right to hear a concert of your choice? Can you imagine? You have a concert, playing downtown, and the mayor of the city says, well, I heard that guy once tweeted out something that I didn't like, so no, we're not going to allow, name country music star to come and perform in this city because he once tweeted something in support of a politician I don't like. That's the level of discourse we're right now having in Canada, where the city of Abbotsford canceled, Winnipeg canceled. We're very closely working in regard to Saskatoon and West Kelowna right now. As you might know, this Edmonton, clearly the government of Alberta, which has the venue there at the legislative grounds, actually has shown respect for freedom of expression. Also, actually, to give her due, the mayor of Saskatoon said, look, and she said a lot of things that aren't kind and aren't proper, etc., of a very interesting nature against Sean Feucht. But when it came down to it, she says, well, we do have freedom of expression in this country and we have to respect the rule of law. Well, that is all we ask of our politicians, isn't it? Respect our rights and respect the rule of law. And if a politician can't live up to that, whether it's Montreal or Vaughan or Quebec City or the federal government, they need to be held accountable. I have a team of lawyers right now that are reviewing these cases. We have sent out letters to each of these municipalities saying, preserve your records because we'll be needing those.
Excellent. And you mentioned the fact that safety is always used as the justification for this. I can't recall any government at the municipal, provincial, or federal level ever worried about the safety of children at gay pride parades when you have half naked or sometimes fully naked men walking around. And these people would be arrested in any other context, any other forum. But it's okay. This is a politically protected group here, so they can do that. And we don't need to be worried about the safety of children in that context. I am just curious
well, Dave,
how
to jump on that point.
Yeah.
Just to jump on that point, sorry for the interruption, but yeah, it's safety, but also community standards, David. We haven't seen community standards raised in this country for quite a long time. You might remember obscenity debates and all of those things, but now in Vaughan, we must talk about community standards, David, and juxtaposing those two public events. Bring your family to the Pride Parade, but don't you bring your family to this worship concert, because we have community standards in Canada. Well, I don't think that's a debate they really want to have. What are community standards? And if that's somehow a limitation on the ability of a worship concert to proceed, we are really in a weird and backward situation. There's some oxymoronic statements being made.
I mean, what you reminded me, of course, of journalism school. And when you go through the history of censorship in Canada, community standards is really where it ended up in terms of anything being suppressed. If it was grossly over the community standards, and then it was seen to have there was a judicial reason for perhaps repressing that event. And of course, you're exactly right. Where are the community standards here? It's not even mentioned in this debate, and it hasn't been for I don't know how long. But that's an excellent point, and I just found the whole response to be incredible. But I was thinking at the time, especially in Ottawa here, or just outside of Ottawa, Sean was supposed to perform in Gatineau, and the Gatineau Park, and of course Parks Canada interfered immediately, and I thought, well, who's in charge of Parks Canada? Of course, it's the Minister of Canadian Identity, Stephen Guilbeault, the radical environmental activist who was in Trudeau's cabinet and now in Mark Carney's cabinet. So I don't for a minute doubt Stephen Guilbeault was issuing edicts, commands, directives during this whole process. And that's what makes it all scarier, is that we have this sort of woke network from the federal government down to mayors, especially the woke mayor of Montreal, Valerie Plante, who of course is the one who fined the church. Outrageous. The whole episode was outrageous. I'm so glad people are pushing back, and I'm 100% behind what Sean is doing with Let Us Worship, because churches in Canada put up with far too much, and I think it's time to push back. But we see, I think this is the lesson for me, Marty, because churches did not push back in a large degree, including some of the largest churches in Canada, and the largest churches in Canada are evangelical church, charismatic churches in Calgary, Vancouver, Ottawa. Yes, there's a church in Ottawa. None of them really pushed back. They just said, okay, well, we won't have services, and okay, we'll mask up, and everybody will be 10 feet apart. And yes, we'll do what you say, government, because that's what we have to do. Because the church has accepted that, we're getting this right now. And now this is a dangerous legal precedent. I'm no lawyer, but I think I'm smart enough to see this. When you fine a church $2,500 for hosting an event, a spiritual event, a religious event, that's a dangerous precedent. And any city can now follow through and say, hey, the mayor of Montreal got away with it. Why can't I? Because I don't like these Christians in my city. They make me feel guilty. They make me feel like maybe I'm wrong about my personal philosophy. So I just want them suppressed. So do you think that's a dangerous legal precedent here?
Well, I think it's a dangerous political precedent for sure. And we got to make sure that the legal precedent pushes back against this political idea that you can stop worship services from going on within a church. And I think it's important for the Canadian community at large to kind of step back from the situation as well. We were not dealing with political rallies by Sean Feucht. We were not dealing with some sort of mega rally being held in a federal facility, although that would also be protected by freedom of expression. All we were dealing with is a worship concert organized by a Canadian society of artists and musicians to Canada to perform his worship music in Canada for free. That's what we're dealing with. And if that can be stopped, if that can be censored, there's nothing that religious communities in Canada could do that's less offensive than that. So really we're dealing with, is there any space in the public square for the public practice of religious faith? I actually dealt with a similar issue in Toronto about 10 years ago, where they tried to cancel a concert in Yonge and Dundas Square that had been there for years and years. And The city officials said, well, you can't sing the song that there's no God like Jehovah. That's offensive. And there was nothing that could be done until we fought back against that. We fought back and we made a mock of it in the press as well. So, I mean, we recorded the city's statements and they were saying, well, you're proselytizing by singing and you can't proselytize in this country. Just complete asinine comments in a free society. Of course you can share your faith in Canada. That is exactly what the freedom of religion allows you to do. The freedom of thought, opinion, and belief and expression. You can have a religious debate in Yonge and Dundas Square. And, eventually it became such a public issue that a media reporter asked John Tory about it. And John Tory, the mayor at the time, said, no, that doesn't actually make sense. And maybe that's where we have to get to in Canada, where we show that, this claim that we need to protect your safety and not allow you to walk in the woods, well, that's ridiculous. That's actually dumb. And this idea that you can't sing a worship song in a public space in Canada, that's ridiculous. And if you can't do that, you can't really do anything. None of the pride stuff, no other religious group can access the public square. It is ridiculous to ban a worship concert. And for safety reasons, this stuff needs to be mocked. It needs to be shamed. And maybe Canadian society can start to think for themselves, because the media narrative, it's so thin on these issues. It really is very thin. And the values of fundamental freedoms in Canada, if we're going to let this thin veneer that is being painted over them be the excuse for taking, that can't stand. We need to pierce this, and it needs to be pierced rather directly. And I appreciate how you're doing that on your show, David.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, because these are issues that are very important to me. They always have been. I guess my concluding query is regarding teachers in the Ottawa area, Matt and Nicole Alexander. They are, of course, the parents of Josh Alexander, who has been on this program and made national headlines by objecting to boys using a girls' washroom at his Ottawa school. And he said it had nothing to do with any kind of transgender phobia, but that the girls really objected to it. And they needed a champion. They needed somebody out there saying, stop this. It makes us feel uncomfortable. No kidding. And I remember when this all started, what we small c conservatives called the bathroom bill that came through the Trudeau government. That's exactly what we said was going to happen, that there were going to be massive incidents of men or teenagers thinking for a day or so that they're female, using a woman's change room simply for voyeuristic purposes, and making women and girls feel uncomfortable. We knew this was going to be obvious, but of course everybody said, no, this is never going to happen. But I was shocked to discover, I got an email from Nicole Alexander early this week or late last week, and she told me that she and her husband had been terminated as teachers in Ottawa because they refused to, in her words, celebrate and affirm, quote unquote, LGBTQ issues with children as young as 3. And I guess I shouldn't be surprised, because this is a tyranny. And of course, in Canada, we don't just have Pride Month. It's supposed to be June. We have Pride Season now. And every city in Canada seems to choose a different month to have their gay pride parade. So you're never really free from celebrating this LGBTQ holy day or holy month or holy season. But I know you're not personally involved in this case, but I know the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms is fighting on behalf of Matt and Nicole. Matt will be on my show Friday to discuss this matter. So I just wanted to bring it up with you. What's the situation, and do you think there's any feasibility of these two Christian leaders being reinstated as teachers? Do you think this could be overturned?
This is a very important case, David, and just kind of involved in managing the team that's working directly with Matt and Nicole. If you step back at this case, and it hits me pretty directly as well. My dad's a school teacher, public school teacher as well. And the issue here is, can you, as a person with a viewpoint that is traditional or non promoting of the LGBTQ ideology, and that has changed and morphed over the last little while, and in schools, David, it's Pride season all year round. There is no time when it's not appropriate to promote Pride in public schools and even Catholic schools in this country. That is very clear from many of the cases that I've been in, and don't you step out of line. So the question is can you have people with traditional values in public schools as teachers? That's what's really at stake here. Or do you have to, as a public school teacher, embrace an ideological position? And without saying anything pro or against this ideological position of LGBTQ ideology, whatever it may be this year and whatever it may be next year, can you as a teacher just not embrace those things and rather just teach your kids the basics of education that we set up these schools to do and that they're taxpayer funded to do? That's the issue, because it's quite clear if you look at the situation with Matt and Nicole, and speaking from my own opinion here, that the school district was looking for a reason to go after them. And they knew that they had this faith. They could see it obviously being expressed in some ways through their son in a different school board, the Catholic school board, and now Matt and Nicole were in the public school board. But there was a very clear focus on Matt and Nicole. What could they do to get rid of these teachers who didn't align with this ideological position that the school board was promoting? And, you know, if we're going to allow school boards to promote ideological positions, which is a very, that's a different issue, but it's a very worthwhile debate. If we're going to allow these school boards to promote these ideological positions to children, shouldn't we at least respect the constitutional rights and freedoms of the teachers in those schools to not participate in ideological indoctrination of children? And that's the issue. There's no doubt, thanks to the Supreme Court of Canada's recent decision in 2024, that public schools are government entities. And when they're a government entity, they have to have what's called a duty of neutrality. They can't promote or hinder belief. Well, these ideological positions very much amount to beliefs, especially in regard to the issues of gender and sexuality. And if they're hindering beliefs and more, refusing to accommodate religious difference, a teacher who does not have the ability pursuant to their faith to endorse and promote these religious beliefs, well, then they are very right to be in a position where the school board and the union itself is under challenge for violating the religious freedoms of these teachers. There was a coalescence here. The union of these teachers was going after the religious expression of their son, while at the same time supposed to be representing the interests of these teachers. And now when the union is going to make a grievance, they say, no, we're not going to advance a grievance on these teachers who are clearly fired by the school board, in my view, for not promoting an ideological position in schools. And so very concerning case, very important case. There's multiple angles that are going on. There's human rights issues, there's freedom of religion issues, and there's also this concept that in a unionized school environment, do you even have a right to raise your constitutional questions and concerns when your government employer violates your religious freedoms? According to the union, they can just stop it carte blanche, and they don't have to advocate for those issues and for those rights of their members, obviously, because they don't agree with those rights of their members and they don't agree with the positions of their members. So there's a lot of significant issues that affect a massive number of Canadians. Can you be a teacher in Canada without promoting this government-sponsored ideological position that would go counter to your beliefs of conscience or your religious beliefs? That's the issue.
Yes, that's the issue. It's the bureaucratic tyranny of school boards, of unions, governments, all seeing the same eye to eye, on the same issue here. So it's absolute tyranny. But I want to thank you for the work you're doing on behalf of people like this who are being absolutely targeted by the system, by governments, by unions, by schools, and all those other people at the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms has always been there to fend for, to fight for, and I think it's so important. And I've been a supporter of your organization for many years, in many ways actually. And I've always found the work you do to be incredibly important and relevant to the political discourse in this country. And you take on cases that are not just important, but I think are symbolic and emblematic of the problems this country is facing in terms of just having basic freedoms intact, leaving basic freedoms intact. So thank you for lending your eloquence and expertise to the broadcast today, Marty. It's been a pleasure. I know we'll have you back on some other issues, but thank you for your time today. It has been a real pleasure.
Well, thank you, David. It's really a privilege as a lawyer who's dedicated to defending the constitutional rights and freedoms of Canadians to be able to work with the Justice Center support to do that. Most lawyers don't have the opportunity that we have to defend Canadians pro bono, to stand up for what we really care about. And it's really a privilege. And so thank you for your support for the Justice Center. And thank you for talking about these issues as well, because this really is an issue in the hearts and minds of Canadians as well as in the courts.
Appreciate it once again, Marty. Thank you, and God bless and Godspeed.
Thank you.
That, of course, was Marty Moore. Thank you for watching that interview. I think it was very informative. I wanted to share one last thing with you here today, if I can find it here. This is here we are. This is Senator Roger Cuzner. I was at a friend's place last night. His wife put a cigarette out in the fire pit before we went inside for dinner. 10 minutes later, we noticed the pit was a full blaze. Innocent enough, but incredibly dangerous. I support Premier Houston's call on this 100%. So, what is he suggesting? That everybody in the forest is lighting fires and just carelessly leaving them places? Incredible. But anyway, thank you for watching today. I've got time. I'm going to show you the merchandise. I'll be back with some concluding. Thanks for watching today. Tune in tomorrow. I've got Matt Alexander on tomorrow. He's one of the 2 teachers fired by the Ottawa School Board for not celebrating LGBTQ Pride Month. And of course, his son, Josh Alexander, was also involved in a political controversy, and he was on this show. Watch tomorrow. We'll be on the usual time, 10 a.m. This should be a fantastic interview. Thanks for watching today. From Ottawa, this has been David Krayton broadcasting to you live. Godspeed to all of you.